Listen up. You think you know what happens when an alpha gets rejected? You think you've seen betrayal? Let me tell you about King Vaelor Draven, a man who built an empire with his bare hands, married the woman who made him stronger, then watched his own pride burn it all to ash. This isn't some fairy tale where love conquers all. This is about what happens when power poisons everything you touch, when fear disguises itself as strength, and when the person you thought would never leave finally walks away. Stick with me till the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is paying attention. Because what you're about to hear, it'll change how you see power, loyalty, and what it really means to be an alpha. The first snow of winter hit Valdareth like a fist. Vaelor stood at the tower window, watching flakes the size of copper coins hammer against black stone. Behind him, the throne room blazed with firelight and the stink of wine-soaked nobility. Laughter echoed off vaulted ceilings. Somewhere beneath the noise, a woman played a harp made from whalebone and silver wire. He wasn't listening. His eyes tracked the courtyard below where servants hauled crates of grain into storage cellars. Winter meant siege preparation. Winter meant checking supplies, reinforcing gates, making sure every weak point in the fortress had been fortified twice over. Winter meant survival. Elyra appeared at his shoulder without a sound. She'd always moved like that, quiet, deliberate, efficient, no wasted motion, no unnecessary drama. She wore black velvet tonight, simple and severe, her dark hair pulled back in a style that would have looked plain on anyone else. On her, it looked like a blade. "How many crates?" she said. Not a greeting, not small talk, just the question that mattered. Vaelor glanced at her. 800, maybe 9 if the northern route holds. Enough for 4 months if we ration properly. 5 if we're careful. He nodded. She was always right about numbers, about logistics, about the unglamorous machinery that kept empires running when glory faded and banners rotted in the rain. That's what he'd loved about her first. Not her beauty, though she had that, sharp-edged and unsettling. Not her bloodline. She had none worth mentioning. But her mind. The way she could look at chaos and see patterns. The way she understood that kingdoms weren't built on speeches and sword fights. They were built on grain counts and supply lines and knowing exactly how much weight a bridge could carry before it collapsed. She'd made him better. For 7 years, she'd stood beside him and made him better. And now he was about to destroy that. "The council wants an heir," he said. Elyra didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept watching the courtyard like she was counting crates herself. "The council wants many things," she said, "most of them stupid." Vaelor's jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke. I'm not laughing. They're talking about the succession, about what happens if I fall in battle, about stability. Then don't fall in battle." He turned to face her fully. "Elyra, 7 years. No child. They're getting nervous." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter steel. Let them be nervous. Nervous keeps them sharp. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting tonight. She walked past him toward the banquet hall, her footsteps silent on stone floors. He watched her go, watched the way nobles parted around her like water around a rock. She commanded respect without asking for it, without needing to demand it. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Because Vaelor Draven was an alpha king in a world that measured alphas by legacy, by bloodline, by the ability to produce the next generation of power. And despite everything Elyra had given him, her brilliance, her loyalty, her ruthless efficiency, she hadn't given him that. The council met 3 days later. 12 men around a table made from a single piece of ironwood, its surface scarred by decades of knife marks and wine stains. Lord Garrett, master of coin, sat at Vaelor's right. General Thorn, commander of the Northern Legion, sat at his left. The others filled in the gaps: merchants, landholders, military strategists, each one vital to keeping Valdareth functional, and each one watching him like wolves circling wounded prey. Garrett spoke first. His voice had the smooth emptiness of a man used to delivering bad news in pleasant tones. "My king, the Eastern territories are restless. They're asking questions about the succession, about continuity of rule." Vaelor leaned back in his chair. "Let them ask. Asking leads to doubt," Thorn said. "Doubt leads to opportunity. Opportunity leads to some ambitious warlord deciding he can do better. I'd like to see him try." "So would I," Thorn said. But I'd prefer not to fight a civil war while defending 3 borders. Silence settled over the table like dust. Lord Brennan, oldest of the council and meaner than a starved wolf, cleared his throat. The Queen is a remarkable administrator. No one disputes that. But administration doesn't secure dynasties. Children do. Vaelor's hand tightened around his wine cup. Careful. I'm always careful, Brennan said. That's why I'm still alive. And that's why I'm saying what everyone else is thinking. 7 years is a long time to wait for an heir that isn't coming. She's not barren, Vaelor said. Then where's the child? Vaelor stood. The chair scraped against stone. Every man at the table went still. This meeting is over. My king. Over. He walked out before anyone could argue, before anyone could see the crack in his armor, before anyone could smell the fear leaking through. Because Brennan was right. 7 years was a long time, and Vaelor had started to wonder if the problem wasn't Elyra, if maybe the problem was him. Alphas don't admit weakness. They can't afford to. Weakness invites challenge. Challenge invites chaos. Chaos invites death. So you bury the doubt deep and you build walls around it, and you pray no one notices the foundation crumbling beneath your feet. But doubt is patient. It waits. It grows. It finds the cracks. Lady Selene Marrow arrived during the first thaw. She came from the southern provinces with letters of introduction from 3 minor lords and a reputation for political maneuvering that would have impressed Machiavelli. Beautiful in the obvious way, blonde hair, blue eyes, curves in all the expected places, the kind of beauty that made men stupid. Vaelor wasn't stupid, but he was desperate. She presented herself in the throne room on a morning when sleet hammered the windows and the fire couldn't quite drive the chill from the stone. She wore green silk that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. She curtsied with perfect form. Your Majesty, I bring greetings from Lord Weston and the Southern Council. Vaelor studied her from his throne. Elyra sat beside him, motionless, reading the woman like a contract full of fine print. What does the South want? Elyra said. Selene's smile didn't waver. To offer support. To strengthen ties, to remind the crown that loyalty runs deep in the southern territories. Loyalty can be bought, Elyra said. What's the price? There's no price, Your Grace. Only friendship. Friendship, Elyra repeated. The word fell flat, stripped of meaning. Selene met her eyes. The kind of friendship that benefits everyone involved. The throne room went quiet except for wind howling against shuttered windows. Vaelor knew what was happening. He'd seen this play before. A beautiful woman, a calculated approach, an offer wrapped in silk and sweetness. Under normal circumstances, he'd have sent her back south with polite words and empty promises. But these weren't normal circumstances. The council was circling, the territories were restless, and sitting beside him was a queen who'd given him everything except the one thing that mattered to men who measured worth in bloodlines. So he made a choice, the kind of choice that breaks kingdoms. Lady Selene will stay, he said, as a guest of the court, to strengthen ties with the South. Elyra turned to look at him, just turned, didn't speak, didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. He'd just crossed a line, and they both knew it. That night, Elyra didn't come to their chambers. Vaelor found her in the library, surrounded by ledgers and supply manifests. She worked by candlelight, her quill scratching across parchment in quick, efficient strokes. She didn't look up when he entered. You're upset, he said. I'm working. Elyra. The eastern granaries are short 40 barrels. The northern route lost 2 wagons to bandits, and the southern territories just sent us a spy wrapped in silk. So yes, I'm working. She's not a spy. Elyra set down her quill. Then she's worse. She's bait. That's paranoid. That's experience. She looked at him finally. The council put her up to this. They want an alternative. They want you thinking about replacement options. No one's replacing you. Then what's she doing here? Vaelor had prepared answers. Political necessity, strategic alliance, diplomatic courtesy. All the smooth lies that powerful men tell when they're doing something they know is wrong. But Elyra's eyes stripped those lies bare. So he told the truth. They want an heir. They're scared. And I don't know how to give them what they want without humiliating me, Elyra finished. without parading a fertile replacement in front of the entire court, without making it clear that 7 years of partnership means nothing compared to 9 months of pregnancy. That's not... Don't. She stood. Don't insult me by pretending this is anything other than what it is. She walked past him. He caught her arm. I'm trying to protect the kingdom. She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. Her voice dropped to a whisper. No. You're trying to protect yourself. From the council. From doubt. From the possibility that you might be the reason we don't have a child. She pulled free and left. And Vaelor stood alone in a library full of books about conquest and strategy and empire building, realizing none of them had taught him a damn thing about this. Understanding often comes too late. You make the choice. You commit to the path. And only afterward, when the damage spreads like poison through everything you've built, do you see what you've done. By then, reversal is impossible. The mechanism has already begun. Selene integrated into court life like ink into water. She attended every banquet, every council session she was permitted, every public gathering where nobles postured and merchants negotiated, and the machinery of power ground forward. She was charming, educated, politically astute, and she made sure everyone knew it. At dinner 3 weeks after her arrival, she sat 4 seats down from Vaelor, directly across from Lord Garrett. The conversation had turned to trade routes and tariffs when she leaned forward slightly. If I may, Your Majesty, the southern territories have experience with the eastern merchants. Their negotiating tactics rely on artificial scarcity. If we... Elyra's voice cut through like a knife through silk. The crown is aware of eastern tactics. We've been managing them successfully for 7 years. Selene smiled. Of course, Your Grace. I only meant to offer perspective. We have perspective, Elyra said. What we don't need is redundancy. The table went silent. Selene's smile held. I apologize if I overstepped. You did. Vaelor should have ended it there, should have backed his queen, should have made it clear that Elyra's word was law and no southern interloper was going to undermine her authority at his own table. Instead, he said, alternative viewpoints are valuable. Let her speak. Elyra went very still. Selene continued talking. Something about merchant guilds and tax structures. Vaelor wasn't really listening. He was watching his queen's face, watching the way her expression didn't change, watching the way she lifted her wine cup with a hand that didn't shake. She didn't cause a scene, didn't shout or throw things or storm out like a character in some cheap drama. She just sat there. And that silence was worse than any explosion, because it meant she was done fighting. It meant she'd made a calculation, and the numbers didn't favor staying in this battle. After dinner, Vaelor found her in their chambers. She was packing. Where are you going? He said. The Queen's Wing, the old apartments. Those haven't been used since my mother died. I know. Elyra folded a dress with mechanical precision. They're far from the banquet hall, far from the throne room, far from wherever you're conducting your experiment in replacement wives. You're being dramatic. Am I? She turned to face him. You just chose her opinion over mine, in front of the entire council, in front of every noble who's watching to see if the queen still matters. I was encouraging diverse perspectives. You were undermining me. She picked up another dress. And you know it. Elyra, stop. Why? She kept packing. So you can tell me this is strategic? So you can explain how bringing a beautiful, fertile, politically connected woman into court and elevating her voice above mine is actually about protecting the kingdom? She faced him fully. Her eyes were dry. That somehow made it worse. You want an heir? Fine. I understand that. Empires need continuity. But don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. Which is what? A test. To see if I'll fight. To see if I'll claw and scream and make myself look unstable so you can justify replacing me with someone more convenient. Vaelor's fists clenched. That's not. Save it. She lifted her trunk. I've watched enough kings destroy enough queens to know how this works. You need me weak. You need me emotional. You need me to give you a reason. Her voice stayed level. Cold. Precise. I won't give you one. She walked out. And Vaelor stood in empty chambers that suddenly felt enormous. The thing about destroying something slowly is that you can pretend it's not happening. A marriage doesn't collapse in a day. It erodes. Piece by piece, choice by choice, each decision seemingly small, each compromise barely noticeable, until you wake up and realize you're standing in ruins. Months passed. Winter deepened. Snow piled against fortress walls until guards had to dig tunnels to reach the watchtowers. The kingdom settled into the hibernation rhythm of cold season survival, rationing, maintenance, preparation for spring. Inside the palace, a different kind of winter took hold. Elyra ran the kingdom from her isolated wing with ruthless efficiency. She managed supply chains, resolved disputes, coordinated with regional governors. She did her job flawlessly. But she stopped attending banquets, stopped sitting beside Vaelor at public functions, stopped pretending they were anything other than political partners trapped in a failing alliance. Selene, meanwhile, bloomed. She occupied the space Elyra vacated, sat in the queen's chair at dinners, advised on council matters, smiled at visiting dignitaries. She played the role of royal companion so smoothly that nobles started forgetting there was already a queen, and Vaelor let it happen. Not because he loved Selene, he didn't. She was a means to an end, a political tool, a way to show the council he was taking their concerns seriously. But the problem with using people as tools is that they have their own agendas. And Selene's agenda ran deeper than anyone suspected. Lord Garrett found Vaelor in the war room 6 months into Selene's residency. "My king, we have a problem." Vaelor looked up from a map of the Northern Territories. Define problem. Carrickthorne has blockaded Frostvale Pass. Vaelor's blood went cold. Frostvale was Valdareth's primary winter supply route. Grain from the eastern provinces. Medicine from the southern cities. Everything that kept the kingdom alive during the frozen months came through that pass. Garrett continued. "He's demanding tariffs, threatening to starve us out if we don't pay." "How much?" 50,000 gold plus trade concessions. "That's insane." "That's leverage." Garrett's expression was grim. He knows we can't survive winter without those supplies. He knows we're vulnerable. Then we go to war. In winter, through mountain passes, against an enemy who controls the high ground? Garrett shook his head. "We'd lose half our army to frostbite before we ever saw combat." Vaelor slammed his fist on the table. "Then what do you suggest?" Before Garrett could answer, the door opened. Elyra walked in. She wore black wool and leather, dressed for travel, not court. Her hair was braided tight against her skull. She carried a rolled map under one arm. "I have a solution," she said. The two men stared at her. She unrolled the map across the table. It showed the Northern Territories in detail. Mountains, valleys, rivers, forests. She pointed to a route marked in red ink. Moonshade Forest. 12 riders. 3 days through terrain Carrick's scouts won't expect. We come up behind his blockade and burn his supply depot. No supplies means no siege. He retreats or starves. Garrett frowned. Moonshade is forbidden territory. The locals say it's cursed. The locals say a lot of things, most of them designed to keep strangers out. Elyra's finger traced the route. "I've studied the terrain. It's passable. Dangerous, but passable." Vaelor studied her. "You want to lead this. I'm the only one who can. You need to command the frontal assault. Garrett needs to manage the kingdom. Thorn's needed at the northern border." She met his eyes. "This is what I do. Strategy, execution, results. It's suicide," Garrett said. "It's survival." Elyra rolled up the map. "The council wanted proof I'm still valuable. Here's their proof." The room went quiet. Vaelor looked at this woman he'd married, this woman he'd humiliated, this woman who should have been broken by now. Instead, she was solving the problem that threatened to destroy them all, and she was doing it alone. "Why?" he said. "Why help us now?" Elyra's smile was cold as winter itself. "Because this is my kingdom too, and I'll be damned if I let it fall because you were too scared to trust me." She walked out, leaving the map behind. Garrett looked at Vaelor. "She's right. It's our best option." Vaelor knew that. He also knew something else. The woman he'd tried to replace was worth 10 of him, and he'd realized it too late. The War Council convened that night. Generals, advisors, nobles, all crowded into the strategy chamber. Elyra presented her plan with clinical precision. Attack from 2 directions. Draw Carrick's attention south while hitting his supply lines from the north. Classic hammer and anvil. The council approved it, because brilliance has its own gravity. Afterward, Vaelor found Elyra in the armory, checking equipment. "I'm sorry," he said. She didn't look up from the sword she was sharpening. "For which part?" "All of it." "That's not specific enough to mean anything." "Elyra." She set down the whetstone, looked at him finally. "You brought her here to make me jealous, to make me fight, to prove I still cared enough about being your queen to defend my position." Vaelor said nothing. "But I don't operate on jealousy. I operate on results. And the result of your little test is that you've shown the entire kingdom that power matters more to you than partnership, that pride matters more than respect, that you'd rather have a dynasty than a queen." She picked up the sword, tested its weight. "So here's what happens now. I win your war. I save your kingdom. And then I decide whether you deserve to keep me." She walked past him, and Vaelor understood something fundamental. He thought he was in control. He thought he was testing her, but she'd been testing him. And he'd failed. Dominance isn't about volume. It isn't about force. It's about certainty, about knowing your value so deeply that no external validation can shake it. Elyra had that certainty. Vaelor had mistaken it for coldness. Now he saw it for what it was: strength, the kind he'd been too insecure to recognize. 3 days later, Elyra departed for Moonshade Forest with 12 Shadow Rangers, the kingdom's best scouts and guerrilla fighters. They left before dawn, slipping out through the northern gate like ghosts. Vaelor watched from the tower. Selene appeared at his shoulder. "She'll die out there," Selene said. "The forest will kill her. Then you'll be free." Vaelor turned to look at her, really looked at her for the first time in months. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the ambition, the cold mathematics of someone who viewed people as chess pieces. "Get out," he said. "Your Majesty, get out." Selene's mask cracked. "You need me. The council expects—" "I don't care what the council expects. I care about my queen, my real queen, the one currently risking her life to save a kingdom I almost destroyed." He stepped closer. "You're done here. Pack your things. Be gone by morning." Selene's face twisted. "You'll regret this." "Maybe. But not as much as I regret bringing you here in the first place." Guards appeared at his gesture. They escorted her out. Vaelor stood alone in the tower, watching snow fall across a kingdom at war. And in the Moonshade Forest, Elyra led 12 riders through terrain that had killed better expeditions. She carried 2 things hidden in her cloak. One was a knife. The other was a pair of tiny silver shoes, stitched years ago for a child that never came. She mourned that child sometimes. But she mourned something else more. The woman she'd been before power taught her that love without respect is just pretty slavery. Behind enemy lines, in a command tent lit by oil lamps and paranoia, Warlord Carrick Thorne opened a letter sealed with green wax. Lady Selene's handwriting covered the page. It detailed troop movements, Elyra's route, the timing of Vaelor's assault, everything he needed to turn the Queen's brilliant strategy into a perfect ambush. Carrick smiled, and in Valdareth, in a palace that reeked of betrayal and consequences, King Vaelor Draven finally understood what he'd done. He'd invited a serpent into his house, given it access to his secrets, and sent the woman he loved into a trap. The question now wasn't whether Elyra would survive. It was whether he deserved her to. Moonshade Forest swallowed them whole. Elyra rode at the front, her breath fogging in air so cold it burned the lungs. Behind her, 12 Shadow Rangers moved through darkness like they were born to it. No torches, no conversation. Just the creak of leather and the muffled thud of hooves on frozen ground. The trees here grew wrong, twisted, branches reaching sideways instead of up, creating a canopy so dense that noon looked like midnight. Local folklore said the forest was cursed, said travelers who entered never came out, said the trees themselves fed on human fear. Elyra had read those stories. She'd also read geological surveys, topographical maps, and explorer journals from before the superstition took hold. Moonshade wasn't cursed. It was simply difficult. Dense undergrowth, unstable terrain, natural gas pockets that created eerie lights the locals mistook for spirits. Fear thrives on ignorance. Strip away the mystery, and you're left with problems that can be solved. That's what separated survivors from victims. Survivors saw obstacles. Victims saw omens. Garrett, one of her rangers, guided his horse alongside hers. His face was wrapped in wool against the cold, only his eyes visible. How much further to the ridge? 6 hours if the trails hold, 8 if we hit ice. And if Kyric's scouts spot us, then we fight. Elyra didn't look at him, but they won't. They're watching the southern approach. They're watching for an army, not a strike team. You sound certain. I am certain, because I know how men like Kyric think. They prepare for the obvious threat. They fortify against the frontal assault. They never imagine someone might come at them sideways. She urged her horse forward. The forest closed around them like a fist. Back in Valdareth, Vaelor paced the war room like a caged animal. Maps covered every surface. Troop positions marked in red and blue ink. Supply routes, elevation charts, every piece of data that might give him an edge in the coming battle. None of it mattered if Elyra didn't come back. General Thorn entered without knocking. His armor was already strapped on, sword belted at his hip. Ready for war. The men are assembled. We march at dawn. Good. Vaelor didn't look up from the maps. My king. Thorn's voice carried an edge, if I may speak freely. You're going to anyway. Thorn moved to the table, placed one scarred hand on the map. The Queen's plan is sound, tactically brilliant actually, but it requires perfect timing. If she's delayed even by hours, she won't be. If she's delayed, Thorn continued, we'll be hitting Kyric's defenses head-on with no support. We'll lose a third of our forces before we even reach the barricades. Then we lose them. Vaelor met his eyes. But we commit. We trust the plan. Even if the plan was made by someone you've spent 6 months undermining? The room went cold. Vaelor's hand moved to his sword hilt. Carefully, General. Thorn didn't flinch. I've served this crown for 20 years, fought beside your father, watched you grow from an arrogant prince into a competent king. So I've earned the right to tell you when you're being a fool. He leaned forward. That woman is saving your kingdom. Again. After you humiliated her. After you paraded a replacement in front of the entire court. After you chose your pride over her partnership. Vaelor's jaw clenched. I know what I did. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you knew the mechanics but missed the meaning. You knew you were hurting her. You didn't understand you were destroying the one person who made you better than your worst instincts. Thorn straightened. Power makes men stupid. It convinces them that control equals strength, that possession equals devotion, that the people around them exist to validate their authority rather than challenge it. He walked toward the door, stopped. Your father understood something you're still learning. The strongest partnerships aren't built on dominance. They're built on mutual terror, on both people knowing that if they lose each other, they lose the best version of themselves. He left. Vaelor stood alone in a room full of maps that suddenly felt meaningless. Because Thorn was right. He'd spent 6 months testing Elyra's loyalty when he should have been proving his own. And now she was out there in the dark, risking her life for a king who'd proven he didn't deserve her. Understanding your mistakes doesn't erase them. It just makes you aware of the damage while you're still causing it. The real test comes later, when the consequences arrive and you have to decide whether to own what you've done or bury it under justification and blame. Most men choose burial. Alphas who survive choose ownership. In Moonshade Forest, Elyra called a halt at midnight. They'd reached a clearing where the canopy opened enough to see stars. Her rangers dismounted in silence, each one moving to assigned tasks. Perimeter watch, horse care, equipment check. No fire. No light beyond starlight filtering through twisted branches. Elyra stood at the clearing's edge, studying the darkness beyond. Garrett approached with dried meat and water. She took both without looking away from the trees. You're worried, he said. I'm calculating. About what? Whether Kyric knows we're coming. Garrett frowned. How could he? We've been careful. No tracks, no witnesses. Information doesn't require witnesses. It requires someone with access. She bit into the meat. Someone who knows our plans, our routes, our timing. You think we have a traitor? I think we've had one for months. I just haven't been able to prove it. She turned to face him. Celine didn't come to Valdareth for friendship. She came with an agenda. The Southern Lords don't send their prize pieces into hostile territory without a reason. Garrett's hand moved to his knife. You think she's feeding Carrick intelligence? I think she's been feeding him everything, which means this brilliant strategy of mine might be walking us straight into an ambush. Then why continue? Because ambush or not, this is still our best option. Carrick's blocking the pass. Our people are starving. Retreat isn't strategic. It's surrender. She looked back at the forest. And I'd rather die fighting than live defeated. The words hung in the cold air between them. Garrett studied her face in the starlight. Permission to speak openly, Your Grace? Granted. You're not doing this to save the kingdom. You're doing this to prove something. To whom? To the king, to the council, to yourself. You're out here risking everything because you need to show them you're more than a womb with a crown. Elyra's smile was sharp as broken glass. You're wrong. I already know my value. This isn't about proof. It's about consequence. The king made choices. Those choices have prices. I'm making sure he pays them. What if the price is your life? Then he lives with that, with knowing his pride killed the one person who actually made him competent. She handed back the water skin. Get some rest. We move again in 3 hours. Garrett hesitated. Your Grace, for what it's worth, the men would follow you to hell if you asked. Good. She turned away. Because that's probably where we're headed. Leadership isn't about being loved. It's about being trusted. People will forgive you for being harsh, for being demanding, for pushing them past their limits. They won't forgive you for wasting their sacrifice, for throwing their lives away on ego or incompetence or fear disguised as strategy. Elyra understood that. Vaelor was still learning it. Dawn broke over Valdareth like a wound. Red sky, gray clouds, wind that tasted of snow and iron. Vaelor stood before his assembled army in the courtyard. 500 cavalry, 300 infantry. Archers, siege engineers. The best soldiers Valdareth had bred and trained and forged into weapons. They stood in perfect formation, waiting for the words that would send them toward death or glory. Vaelor looked at their faces, young and old, scared and eager, each one trusting that he knew what he was doing. He wasn't sure he did, but doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford. Men of Valdareth. He didn't shout, didn't need to. His voice carried. We march to Frostvale Pass, to break a blockade, to destroy an enemy who thinks hunger will make us weak. He walked along the front line. Carrick Thorne believes he can starve us into submission, believes winter will do his work for him, believes we'll surrender rather than fight. He stopped, met their eyes. He's wrong. A murmur ran through the ranks. We're not marching to negotiate. We're not marching to posture. We're marching to annihilate. To remind every warlord between here and the Ash Wastes what happens when you threaten Valdareth. He drew his sword. The blade caught the light. Your queen rides ahead of us. She's already behind enemy lines, already positioning the blade at Carrick's throat. Our job is simple. Hit him from the front. Make him look south. Make him commit his forces to stopping us. He raised the sword, and when he does, when every eye is on our banners, when every sword is pointed our way, that's when the queen strikes. That's when we crush him between hammer and anvil. The army roared. Vaelor sheathed his sword, mounted his war horse. Thorne appeared beside him. Good speech. I've given better. Better isn't what they need. They need certainty, even if it's manufactured. Vaelor looked at him. You think we'll lose? I think we're gambling everything on a woman you tried to replace. If she fails, we're destroyed. If she succeeds, you owe her a debt you can never repay. Thorne smiled grimly. Either way, my king, you're about to learn what it costs to undervalue the right partner. The army moved out. Behind them, the palace stood empty except for servants and advisors, too old or young to fight. And in the tower, locked in her chambers under guard, Lady Selene Marrow watched them go. She'd already sent her final letter. Carrick knew everything. Now she just had to wait to see which side won, and whether she'd bet on the right king. In Moonshade Forest, Elyra's team reached the ridge at midday. Below them, spread across the valley like an infected wound, sat Carrick's supply depot. Tents, wagons, horse corrals, hundreds of soldiers moving between structures in organized chaos. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Sentries walked perimeters. Everything disciplined, professional, prepared. Too prepared. Elyra studied the layout through a spyglass, counted guards, noted patrol patterns, looked for weaknesses, found none. Garrett crawled up beside her. That's not a supply depot. That's a fortress. I noticed. We can't hit that. Not with 12 people. We'd be slaughtered before we reached the first tent. I know. Elyra collapsed the spyglass, lay flat on the ridge, stared at the sky. Garrett watched her. Your Grace, it's a trap. He knows we're coming, probably knew before we left Valdareth. Then we abort, ride back, warn the king. Can't. By now Vaelor's already engaged. If we retreat, he's fighting alone against fortified positions. He'll be massacred. Garrett's face went pale. Then what do we do? Elyra was quiet for a long moment. When you realize you've been outmaneuvered, you have two options. You can panic, thrash around trying to salvage a failed plan, or you can accept the new reality and adapt. Panic gets you killed. Adaptation gives you a chance. We changed the plan, she said. To what? Something he won't expect? She rolled onto her side, looked at Garrett. How much oil do we have? For the lanterns? Maybe 3 flasks. That's enough. Enough for what? Elyra sat up, brushed dirt from her clothes, started moving back toward the horses, to turn his trap into his funeral. 6 hours later, as the sun bled into the western horizon, Carrick Thorne stood in his command tent reviewing reports. His scouts confirmed it. Vaelor's army was 4 hours from the pass, moving fast, committed to the assault. And somewhere in the forest behind him, a queen with 12 rangers was about to walk into carefully positioned ambush points. He'd win from both directions, crush the king's frontal assault, capture or kill the queen in the forest, present both their heads to the southern lords as proof of his superiority, then negotiate his price for Valdareth's surrender. His lieutenant entered. Sir, movement on the ridge, show me. They walked to the tent's entrance. The lieutenant pointed toward the northern ridge. There. Riders. Carrick counted. 12 of them, moving in formation down the slope toward his depot, riding openly. No stealth, no cover, just coming straight at him like they had nothing to lose. He smiled. Arrogant, just like her reputation suggested. Sound the alarm. Prepare the ambush teams. I want her taken alive if possible. The lieutenant hesitated. Sir, that seems too easy. It is easy. She's desperate. Desperate people make stupid choices, but do it. The lieutenant left. Carrick watched the riders approach, watched them clear the tree line, watched them ride into the killing ground he'd prepared. He didn't see the 3 rangers who'd split off 2 hours ago. Didn't see them circling wide through terrain he'd dismissed as impassable. Didn't see them approaching his fuel depot from the unguarded eastern slope. Pride makes tacticians blind. They prepare for the enemy they expect, the one who follows conventional strategy, the one who values survival over victory. They never prepare for the enemy willing to trade everything for a single devastating blow. The explosion tore through Carrick's fuel depot like the fist of an angry god. Barrels of oil, stores of pitch, alchemical compounds for siege weapons. All of it ignited simultaneously in a fireball that turned night into day and sent a mushroom cloud of smoke boiling into the sky. The shockwave knocked soldiers off their feet, horses screamed and bolted. The carefully organized camp dissolved into chaos as men ran in every direction trying to escape the flames. Carrick spun from his tent entrance, saw his fuel depot, the one that supplied his siege engines, his cooking fires, his winter survival, burning like a vision of hell. Impossible. That depot was guarded, protected. No one could... The second explosion hit the ammunition stores. This one was worse. Barrels of black powder detonating in a chain reaction that sent shrapnel screaming through the camp like metal rain. Tents shredded. Men fell. The organized fortress became a slaughterhouse in seconds. Carrick grabbed his lieutenant by the throat. The queen. Where is she? The man pointed toward the northern approach with a shaking hand. Still coming, sir. She's bait, Carrick snarled. Those riders are a distraction. The real attack came from the east. He shoved the lieutenant away, rallied his commanders with shouted orders. Reform the lines. Protect what's left of the supplies. Get those fires under control. But it was too late, because while his attention was split between the decoy riders and the burning depot, he'd forgotten about the third element, The one Elyra had positioned hours ago, the one he never saw coming. From the southern tree line, hidden in the smoke and chaos, Elyra and 6 rangers emerged on foot, not to fight, to sabotage. They moved through the confusion like ghosts. While soldiers fought fires and commanders screamed orders, they slipped between tents, cutting horse lines, collapsing supply wagons, destroying anything that would slow Carrick's army. Elyra reached the command tent, found the maps, the deployment orders, the communication logs, and the letters, sealed with green wax, written in Celine's handwriting. She read them by firelight while the camp burned around her. Each letter detailed Valdareth's defenses, troop strengths, the Queen's planned route, the King's vulnerabilities. Everything Carrick needed to destroy them, all of it provided by the woman Vaelor had invited into their home. Elyra felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That had gone cold months ago. Something deeper. The last piece of faith she'd been holding on to. The idea that maybe Vaelor had been merely weak, merely scared, merely human in his mistakes. But this wasn't weakness. This was consequences. He'd trusted the wrong person, given power to someone who wielded it like a knife. And now here was the proof, written evidence of what happened when kings chose convenience over loyalty. She folded the letters, tucked them inside her armor. Then she set the command tent on fire. Garrett found her in the smoke. "Your Grace, we have to move. Carrick's reforming his guard." She looked at him. Her face was black with soot. Her eyes reflected flames. "How many of ours made it out?" "All 12. Minor injuries. Nothing critical." "Then we're done. Sound the retreat." They ran, through burning wreckage, through screaming chaos, through the remains of an army that had been perfectly positioned to destroy them, past the camp perimeter, into the forest, onto horses hidden in the tree line. Behind them, Carrick's supply depot burned so hot it turned snow to steam. His ammunition was gone. His fuel was gone. His command structure was shattered, and his blockade was broken. By 12 riders and a queen who understood something Carrick didn't. Victory isn't about winning the fight you planned. It's about changing the game so thoroughly that your enemy can't adapt. Elyra's team rode south through the night. Behind them, the sky glowed orange. Ahead, somewhere in the dark, Vaelor's army was hitting Frostvale Pass from the front. If her timing was right, Carrick's forces were already retreating, already abandoning defensive positions to save what remained of their supplies. If her timing was wrong, Vaelor was riding into a slaughter. She pushed her horse faster. At Frostvale Pass, Vaelor saw the sky light up. The explosion was visible even from 5 miles south. A bloom of fire painting the clouds orange, smoke rising in a column that looked like the finger of some vengeful entity. Thorn rode up beside him. "That's the depot." "That's the Queen," Vaelor corrected. "She did it. Then we move now, while they're disorganized." "No." Vaelor held up a hand. "We wait." "Wait." General Thorn stared at him. "My king, if we hit them now, we might drive them back toward the depot, toward Elyra. She needs an escape route." "So we give up the advantage of surprise?" Vaelor looked at him. "We give her what she needs, even if it costs us tactically." He turned to face his army. "The Queen is struck. The enemy is wounded. But we don't attack out of eagerness. We attack with precision." He raised his sword. "When Carrick's forces retreat, we let them. We secure the pass. We reclaim the route. We don't chase glory. We accomplish the mission." He lowered the sword. "Because victory without your queen coming home isn't victory. It's failure wearing a crown." The army held position, waiting, trusting their king to value the right things for once. And in the burning chaos of Carrick's camp, the warlord made his choice. His supply depot was destroyed. His ammunition was gone. His enemy had outmaneuvered him with humiliating efficiency. Holding the pass meant slow starvation with no way to sustain a siege. He gave the order to retreat. His army abandoned the barricades, pulled back toward the northern territories, left Frostvale Pass undefended. When Vaelor's scouts confirmed the withdrawal, he led his army forward. They encountered no resistance, just abandoned fortifications and supply caches Carrick couldn't transport. The pass was theirs. The blockade was broken. Valdareth would survive the winter. And somewhere in the forest, riding south through darkness and smoke, Elyra carried evidence that would burn down more than Carrick's depot. She was bringing home proof of Celene's betrayal, proof of Vaelor's mistakes, proof that the queen he'd tried to replace had just saved his entire kingdom. The question was whether he'd be king enough to handle the truth, or whether his pride would kill what little remained between them. 3 days later, Elyra rode through Valdareth's gates. The city had prepared a triumph, banners, crowds, musicians, all the ceremony that accompanied military victory. She ignored it all, rode straight to the palace, through the courtyard, up to the throne room doors. Vaelor was waiting. He stood at the base of the throne, alone, no advisors, no guards, just him in the empty hall. She dismounted, walked toward him. Their eyes met across stone floor and winter light. "Welcome home," he said. Elyra stopped 10 feet away. Didn't bow, didn't kneel, just stood there in travel-stained armor with 3 days of dirt on her face. She reached into her cloak, pulled out the letters, threw them at his feet. The papers scattered across the floor, green wax seals catching the light. "That's what your pride cost. That's what happened when you brought a viper into our house and gave her access to everything that mattered." Vaelor stared at the letters. "She sold us to Carrick, every strategy, every weakness, every plan. She was feeding him intelligence from the moment she arrived." He looked up. "Elyra, don't." Her voice cut like steel. "Don't try to justify it. Don't try to explain why you chose her over me. Don't insult me with apologies when what I need is accountability." She stepped closer. "You tested my loyalty. You humiliated me publicly. You brought a replacement into court to see if I'd fight for my position." Another step. "But while you were playing games with our marriage, she was destroying our kingdom. While you were worried about heirs and legacy, she was selling our people to an enemy who would have starved them all." She stood before him now, close enough to touch. "So here's what happens next. You call the Great Tribunal. You assemble every noble and allied ruler, and you let me deliver judgment. Not you, me, because I earned that right. In blood and smoke and carrying your war while you carried your ego." Vaelor's hands clenched. "Elyra, You know nothing." Her eyes were winter steel. "You know you made mistakes. That's easy. Any fool can admit failure after the consequences arrive." She leaned closer. "What you don't know is whether you have the strength to give up control, to let someone else hold power, to stand beside a queen instead of above her." She turned away. "Call the tribunal. 3 days from now. Or I walk. And you can rule this kingdom alone with nothing but your pride and your fear." She walked out, leaving him standing among scattered letters that proved she'd saved everything he'd almost destroyed. That night, Vaelor sat in his private chambers with the letters spread before him. He read every word, every detail Selene had sold, every weakness she'd exposed, and he understood finally what he'd been too blind to see. Elyra had known. Maybe not the specifics, but she'd known Selene was dangerous, had warned him, had tried to make him see. He'd ignored her, chosen to believe a beautiful lie over an uncomfortable truth, and it had nearly destroyed them all. The door opened. General Thorne entered without invitation. "The tribunal's been called. 3 days." "Good." Thorne studied him. "You understand what she's doing?" Vaelor looked up. "Enlighten me." "She's forcing you to choose. Publicly. Irrevocably. Either you give her the authority to deliver judgment, or you prove you haven't learned anything. And if I give her that authority, then you're finally acting like a partner instead of an owner." Thorne walked to the window. "You wanted an heir, legacy, proof you could build something that outlasted you." He turned back. "You already had that. You had a woman brilliant enough to save your kingdom, strong enough to forgive your weakness, loyal enough to risk her life for people who'd watched you humiliate her." Thorne's expression was hard, but you couldn't see it, because you were measuring worth by biology instead of contribution, by bloodline instead of competence. He moved to the door. The tribunal will determine Selene's fate, but you're the one really on trial, and every person in that hall will be watching to see if you've finally figured out what makes a king worthy of his crown." He left. Vaelor sat alone with the truth. He'd thought control made him strong, but he was learning something harder. That real strength meant trusting someone enough to share power, especially when it terrified you. 3 days later, the great tribunal assembled. Every noble house, every allied territory, every merchant guild and military order. They filled the throne room until the crowd spilled into courtyards and outer halls. At the center, on a raised platform, stood 3 chairs, one for the accused, 2 for the sovereigns who would judge them. Selene was brought in under guard. Her beautiful face was pale but composed. She wore simple gray, stripped of all jewelry and status markers. She looked at Vaelor. He didn't meet her eyes. Elyra entered from the opposite side. She wore black and silver. Her crown, unused for months, sat on dark hair. She looked like what she was, a queen who'd stopped asking permission to be sovereign. She took her seat. Vaelor took his. The tribunal began. And in that moment, before assembled witnesses representing the entire Northern Empire, Vaelor Draven made the choice that would define his reign. He gestured to Elyra. My queen will deliver the charges. Not we. Not the crown. My queen. The hall went silent. Elyra stood. Her voice carried to every corner. Lady Selene Marrow, you stand accused of treason, of providing enemy intelligence during wartime, of deliberately undermining the crown's authority for personal gain. She held up the letters. This is the evidence, written in your hand, sealed with your mark, detailing military strategies, troop movements, supply routes, everything Carrick Thorne needed to destroy us. She walked to the center of the platform. How do you answer? Selene's voice trembled. I did what I had to survive. Explain. The queen's eyes had judgment in them. Absolute, final. Selene looked at the crowd, then at Vaelor, then at Elyra. I came here with nothing, no power, no protection. The king brought me to court but gave me no real authority. I was decoration, a political pawn. She took a breath. Carrick offered me something real, a place in his court, status that didn't depend on being someone's mistress or replacement wife. Elyra's expression didn't change. So you sold our people for position. I sold information to secure my future. You sold lives. Children starving because of a blockade you helped to maintain. Soldiers who died because you gave Carrick our strategies. Elyra stepped closer. You didn't survive. You betrayed. There's a difference. The hall murmured. Selene's composure cracked. You don't understand what it's like. To have nothing. To be nothing. To watch queens like you take power for granted while the rest of us scramble for scraps. Elyra's laugh was cold. I was born to merchants. No title, no inheritance, no bloodline worth mentioning. I took nothing for granted because I built everything from competence and will. She leaned down. You had the same opportunity, the same court, the same chance to prove your value through contribution. Instead, you chose betrayal. Chose to tear down rather than build up. She straightened. That's not survival. That's cowardice wearing ambition as a mask. The judgment fell. Selene Marrow would be stripped of all titles, stripped of lands, stripped of family name. She would be exiled beyond the ash wastes with 1 horse and supplies for 3 days. After that, survival was her own problem. The guards led her away. She looked back once at Vaelor. He still wouldn't meet her eyes. Because he understood now what Elyra had known from the beginning. Selene wasn't the real crime. She was the consequence of his crime, of valuing control over partnership, of testing loyalty instead of earning it, of bringing a weapon into his house and being surprised when it cut him. When the hall emptied, Elyra remained seated. Vaelor approached slowly. He stood before her, not above, not commanding, just standing at eye level with a woman who'd saved his kingdom while he'd been busy breaking her heart. Thank you, he said. For what? Her voice was flat. For not letting me destroy everything we built. Elyra studied him. You think this fixes things? One public acknowledgement? One moment of humility? No. But it's a start. She stood, faced him fully. Here's what I need you to understand. I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did, bringing her here, elevating her voice, making me fight for respect in my own home, that broke something. She touched her chest. But I also understand something you're still learning. Kingdoms aren't built by perfect rulers. They're built by rulers willing to face their own monsters. She walked past him, stopped at the door. You want to prove you've changed? Then prove it with consistency. with months of different choices, with evidence that you value partnership over possession. She looked back. Because I'm not your property. I'm not your validation. I'm not the solution to your fear of irrelevance. Her eyes held his. I'm your equal, your partner, your queen. She left, and Vaelor stood alone in an empty throne room, understanding finally, truly, what it meant to share power with someone stronger than your pride. Spring came to Valdareth like a rumor. Snow retreated from the fortress walls in patches, revealing dead grass and frozen mud beneath. Ice on the ramparts began to crack and drip. Rivers that had been silent stone for months started to whisper again with moving water. Inside the palace, a different kind of thaw was happening, slower, more uncertain, more painful. Vaelor woke each morning in chambers that felt too large. Elyra had never returned to the royal wing. She remained in the Queen Mother's apartments, governing from isolation with the same ruthless efficiency she'd always possessed. They saw each other at council meetings, at state functions, at the necessary performances of rulership. They were civil, professional, distant, like two generals forced to occupy the same war room. He tried, small gestures at first, asking her opinion before making decisions, deferring to her judgment on administrative matters, publicly crediting her strategies, all the things he should have been doing for 7 years. She accepted them without warmth, not hostile, just empty of the connection that had once made those gestures meaningful. Understanding what you destroy doesn't rebuild it. That requires something harder. Time, consistency, proof that the change isn't performance, but transformation. And transformation takes longer than ego wants to admit. 2 months after the tribunal, Lord Garrett requested an audience. Vaelor received him in the strategy room. Maps still covered the walls from winter campaigns. Troop positions marked in fading ink. Remnants of battles already won. Garrett entered with the careful posture of a man carrying bad news. My king, we have a situation, defined situation. The southern territories are refusing the spring census. Vaelor frowned. On what grounds? They're claiming administrative overreach, saying the crown has no authority to demand population counts without council approval. That's absurd. The census has been standard procedure for decades. I agree. But Lord Weston is using Celine's exile as justification, saying the crown has become tyrannical, that the queen's judgment was excessive. Vaelor's jaw tightened. The queen's judgment was lawful. Celine committed treason. The evidence was undeniable. I know that. You know that. But Weston is spinning it differently. He's telling the southern lords that we executed a noble woman for political convenience. She wasn't executed. She was exiled. Semantics don't matter when someone's building a narrative. Garrett moved to the map. He's consolidating support. 3 minor houses have already signed loyalty oaths to him instead of the crown. Vaelor studied the map. The southern territories formed a crescent along Valdareth's border, wealthy, agricultural, strategically vital for trade routes. If they broke away, they'd take a third of the kingdom's resources with them. What does he want? Officially, a council vote on all major decisions, limits on royal authority, protection for noble houses from arbitrary punishment, and unofficially, power. Garrett's expression was grim. He wants to be the voice that checks the crown, the authority that nobles defer to when they're scared of royal overreach. He's building himself a throne without calling it one. Vaelor slammed his fist on the table. Then we remind him what happens to ambitious lords who forget their place. With what? Military force? We just survived winter. Our supplies are depleted. Our soldiers are exhausted. We don't have the resources for a southern campaign. Then what do you suggest? Garrett hesitated. The queen. What about her? She has credibility with the administrative class. They respect her competence. If she negotiates, no. Vaelor cut him off. I'm not sending her to clean up another mess I created. My king. This isn't about pride. This is about what works. Weston won't listen to you. He sees you as the tyrant who brought Celine into court and then punished her when it became inconvenient. But he might listen to Elyra, because she's the one who actually delivered justice, who had cause to be vindictive but chose law instead. The words sat heavy in the air. Vaelor knew Garrett was right. He also knew what it would cost to ask. Send for the queen. he said quietly. Elyra arrived within the hour. She wore dark gray, practical, and severe. Her hair was bound back in the style she adopted for work. No decoration, no softness, just efficiency. She listened to Garrett's summary without interrupting. Her face revealed nothing. When he finished, she turned to Vaelor. You want me to negotiate. I'm asking you to consider it. Why? Because you're better at this than I am. Because they'll respect you in ways they won't respect me. Because, he stopped, started again. Because I need you. The room went quiet. Elyra studied him with those winter steel eyes that saw through every defense he'd ever built. You need my competence. There's a difference between needing someone and needing what they can do for you. She walked to the map, traced the southern territories with one finger. If I do this, if I go south and salvage your political disaster, what do I get in return? Whatever you want. I want co-regency. Vaelor blinked. What? You heard me? Full co-regency. Not advisory, not consultative. Equal authority, equal decision-making power. My word carries the same weight as yours in all matters of state. She turned to face him. You want me to save your kingdom again? Then stop pretending I'm a subordinate who serves at your pleasure. Make me your equal in law and practice. That's never been done. Not in Valdareth's history. Then make history. Elyra's voice was cold. Or make excuses. Your choice. The Lords will never accept it. The Lords will accept what you tell them to accept, if you have the spine to enforce it. She moved toward the door. You have until tomorrow to decide. After that, the South is your problem. She left. Garrett looked at Vaelor. She's serious. I know. And she's right. About all of it. The Southern Lords will negotiate with her because she has moral authority you've squandered, but she won't do it on your terms anymore. Vaelor sat heavily in his chair. Co-regency. That's insane. Is it? Garrett's tone was careful. Or is it just uncomfortable? You've relied on her competence for 7 years while keeping the final authority for yourself. She's asking you to formalize what's already been true, that she's your equal. Maybe better than your equal in some ways. Vaelor looked at him sharply. Garrett didn't flinch. I've served this crown for 15 years. I've watched you grow into a decent king. But watching her work, that's watching someone who was born for this, who sees patterns and solutions the rest of us miss. He leaned on the table. You wanted an heir to secure your legacy. You already had something better. A partner capable of ruling beside you and making the kingdom stronger than you could alone. But only if you're willing to truly share power, not delegate it, not grant it conditionally. Share it. He straightened. The question isn't whether she deserves co-regency. It's whether you're secure enough to give it. That night, Vaelor didn't sleep. He paced his chambers, read old treaties, studied the histories of kingdoms that had tried shared sovereignty. Most had failed, usually because one ruler eventually tried to dominate the other, because partnership eroded into competition, because two people with equal power inevitably clashed over direction and authority, but a few had succeeded. The ones where both rulers understood that strength multiplied when it was shared strategically, where ego took a back seat to effectiveness, where the relationship was built on mutual respect instead of romantic illusion. He thought about the last 7 years, about every crisis Elyra had solved while he was busy performing dominance, about every strategy she'd crafted that saved resources and lives, about the fact that she'd walked into Moonshade Forest knowing it might be a trap and did it anyway because the kingdom needed her. She'd proven herself 100 times over. The only thing she was asking for was acknowledgement, legal, public, permanent acknowledgement that she wasn't his helper, she was his equal. And the fact that it terrified him said everything about why he needed to do it. Power creates a specific kind of cowardice. It makes you afraid of anything that might diminish your control, even, especially, when giving up that control would make you more effective. Real strength isn't holding on to authority, it's knowing when to share it. Dawn broke gray and cold. Vaelor summoned the council. They assembled in the throne room, 12 men who'd advised his father and now advised him, merchants and generals and political strategists, each one wielding influence in different ways. They stood before the throne, waiting. Vaelor didn't sit. He stood at ground level with them. Gentlemen, I'm issuing a royal decree. Effective immediately, Queen Elyra will hold co-regency authority, full sovereignty, equal power in all matters of state, military, and law. The silence was immediate and absolute. Lord Brennan spoke first. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone testing dangerous ground. My king, this is unprecedented. The law clearly states, I'm changing the law. Vaelor's voice cut through. The queen has demonstrated competence, loyalty, and strategic brilliance that exceeds anything this council has produced. She saved this kingdom twice in 6 months, while half of you were questioning her value. He looked at each of them in turn. Co-regency isn't radical, it's overdue. And any lord who has a problem with it can explain why a woman capable of destroying Carrick Thorne with 12 rangers somehow isn't qualified to share a throne. Thorne stepped forward. The general's face was unreadable. Permission to speak freely, Your Majesty. Granted. This is the smartest decision you've made in years. Thorne's expression shifted to something almost resembling approval. The men will follow her. The territories will respect her. And having 2 sovereigns means the kingdom doesn't collapse if one of you falls in battle. He glanced at the other council members. Anyone who disagrees is welcome to explain their reasoning, preferably with better arguments than tradition and fear. No one spoke. Garrett stepped forward next. The southern negotiations? The queen will handle them, with full royal authority. Whatever agreements she makes carry the weight of the crown. Vaelor moved toward the door, stopped. And gentlemen, if any of you undermine her authority or question her decisions in public, you'll answer to me personally. Are we clear? Murmured assent rippled through the room. He left them standing there. Went to find Elyra. She was in the archives, surrounded by census records and tax documents. Working. Always working. He stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. She knew he was there. Didn't look up. It's done. Co-regency. Full authority. Legal as of this morning. Her quill stopped moving. She set it down carefully. Stood. Turned to face him. Why now? Because you were right. About all of it. I've been holding on to control because I was scared of being unnecessary. Scared that if I shared power, I'd lose importance. He took a step closer. But watching you work, watching you save this kingdom while I was busy destroying our marriage, that taught me something. Which is that the strongest rulers aren't the ones who dominate. They're the ones who multiply strength by partnering with people better than themselves. Elyra's expression didn't soften. You think a title fixes what's broken between us? No, but it's a start. It's me acknowledging publicly what should have always been true, that you're not my subordinate. You're my equal. He met her eyes. Maybe my better. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. I'll leave for the south tomorrow, with full authority to negotiate whatever terms preserve the kingdom's stability. Understood. She turned back to her work. Vaelor stood there, wanting to say more, wanting to bridge the distance that still existed between them. But words were cheap. He'd said plenty of words over the years. What mattered now was action, consistency, proof. So he left her to her work and started building the evidence she needed. The southern territories waited like a coiled snake. Elyra rode into Lord Weston's domain with an escort of 20 guards and Garrett at her side. Not an army, not a threat, just enough presence to command respect without inviting hostility. Weston's estate sprawled across fertile lowlands, all manicured gardens and marble columns, wealth on display, power without subtlety. He received her in a receiving hall designed to intimidate, high ceilings, gold fixtures, portraits of ancestors glaring down from the walls. Elyra walked in wearing black and silver, her crown visible, her authority undeniable. Weston stood before a fireplace tall enough to roast a horse. He was 40, soft around the middle, with the carefully groomed appearance of someone who'd inherited power rather than earned it. Your Grace, such an honor. Please, sit. I'll stand. Elyra's voice carried no warmth. I'm here to discuss the census and your attempts to undermine crown authority. Weston's smile was oil smooth. I'm simply advocating for noble rights, for checks on royal overreach, by refusing lawful administrative procedures, by questioning whether those procedures are still lawful. After the crown executed a noblewoman for political convenience, Lady Selene committed treason. The evidence was presented publicly. The tribunal was lawful, and her sentence was exile, not execution. You know this. I know that a beautiful woman who threatened the queen's position was conveniently disposed of. Weston's tone shifted. I know that some might see this as a warning. Cross the queen and face consequences. Elyra's laugh was cold. If I wanted to warn you, Lord Weston, I wouldn't need a tribunal. I'd need 12 rangers and a map. The room went very quiet. She stepped closer. Let's be honest about what this is. You're not concerned about noble rights. You're concerned about your own diminishing relevance. The Southern Territories have grown wealthy, and you think that wealth translates to power. She circled him slowly. But wealth without strategic value is just decoration, and your territories produce grain and livestock. Important, yes. Irreplaceable? No. There are 3 other agricultural regions we could develop if you decided to play separatist. It would cost us. But it would cost you more. Weston's face flushed. You're threatening economic warfare? I'm explaining reality. Elyra stopped in front of him. You want limits on royal authority. I'm here to negotiate those limits. But understand that negotiation requires good faith on both sides. And refusing the census? That's bad faith. She gestured to Garrett, who produced a document. Here are the terms. The census proceeds as scheduled. You get formal representation on the Royal Council. 2 seats. Voting rights on economic policy. And a quarterly review process where noble houses can raise concerns about crown decisions. Weston took the document. Read it. His expression shifted from hostility to calculation. This is more than I expected. It's more than you deserve. But it's what the kingdom needs. Elyra's tone was ice. Strong territories make a strong realm. I'm not interested in crushing you. I'm interested in making sure you contribute productively instead of wasting everyone's time with performative rebellion. She moved to the door. You have until tomorrow to decide. Sign the agreement and we move forward. Refuse and you deal with King Vaelor instead of me. And I promise you, he's far less patient than I am. She left. Weston stood holding the document, understanding for the first time that he'd been outmaneuvered. Because Elyra hadn't come to fight. She'd come to win. That night, in the guest quarters of Weston's estate, Garrett found her on a balcony overlooking the gardens. He'll sign. He's smart enough to recognize a good deal when he sees it. Elyra nodded. He's also smart enough to know this was a test, to see if I'd come here with threats or solutions. And you chose solutions. I chose effectiveness. Garrett leaned on the railing beside her. The king made you co-regent. He did. That's significant. Is it? Or is it just another performance? Another way to use me while maintaining ultimate control? You don't believe that. I don't know what I believe anymore. She looked at the stars. I know he's trying. I know he's making different choices. But trying doesn't erase 7 years of being treated as subordinate, of watching him value bloodline over partnership. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? Go ahead. I've served this kingdom for 15 years. I've watched a lot of marriages, royal and otherwise. Most of them were business arrangements that evolved into tolerance at best, mutual contempt at worst. He turned to face her. But for a few years, you two had something different. Partnership. Real partnership. Where both people made each other better. Elyra's jaw tightened. What he did, bringing Celine here, testing your loyalty, that was fear. Fear that he wasn't enough. Fear that without an heir, he'd be seen as weak. Fear that you'd eventually realize you didn't need him. That doesn't excuse it. No. But it explains it. Garrett's voice was gentle, and watching him now, watching him give you co-regency despite it terrifying him, that's growth. That's someone choosing partnership over pride. Elyra looked at him. You think I should forgive him? I think you should decide whether the person he's becoming is worth the pain of what he was. He left her alone with that question. And Elyra stood beneath foreign stars, trying to answer it. 3 days later, Weston signed the agreement. The Southern Territories remained part of Valdareth. The census proceeded. 2 noble seats were added to the council, and a quarterly review process was formalized into law. Elyra returned to this capital as a co-regent who just prevented a civil war without drawing a sword. The city celebrated. Banners, festivals, the kind of public acknowledgement that made her uncomfortable but accepted as necessary. Vaelor met her at the palace gates. They looked at each other across the courtyard. 8 months since he'd destroyed their marriage. 3 months since she'd saved his kingdom. 2 months since he'd made her co-regent. All that history sitting between them like a wall. "You did well," he said. "I did what was necessary. It was more than that. You gave them something I never would have. Dignity and negotiation instead of dominance through force. Because dominance only works until someone stronger comes along." Elyra moved past him. "Dignity builds loyalty that survives beyond individual rulers." She walked toward the palace. He followed. "Elyra, can we talk?" "We talk every day at council." "Not about policy. About us." She stopped, turned. "There is no us, Vaelor. There's a political partnership. There's shared governance. But us? The marriage? That ended when you brought her here. I know I can't fix what I broke, but I'm trying to build something new. Based on what? Guilt? Obligation? The realization that you need my competence? Based on respect. On understanding that I was an idiot who almost destroyed the best thing in my life because I was scared." He stepped closer. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know words mean nothing compared to actions, but I'm asking for a chance, not to go back to what we were, but to build something stronger, something based on equality instead of hierarchy." Elyra's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the performance, the manipulation. She found only exhaustion and honesty. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "Not just politically. You made me question my value, made me wonder if 7 years of partnership meant nothing compared to 9 months of pregnancy. I know. You chose pride over loyalty, power over partnership, and you did it publicly, making sure everyone saw. I know. Then you know why trust doesn't come back with an apology and a title. Trust requires evidence, months of it, maybe years, and even then, the scar remains." She looked away. "I don't know if I have that forgiveness in me. I don't know if what we had can be rebuilt." Vaelor nodded. "I understand, but I'll keep trying anyway. Because you're worth it, and because the man who destroyed us isn't who I want to be." He turned to leave, stopped. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, of what you accomplished in the South, of everything you've built despite me working against you." He walked away, leaving her standing in the courtyard. And for the first time in months, Elyra felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not trust, but possibility. The kingdom settled into an uneasy rhythm. Vaelor and Elyra governed as co-regents. They held joint councils, made decisions together, presented a unified front to visiting dignitaries and territorial lords. In public, they were seamless partners. In private, they remained strangers sharing a burden. 2 months passed. Then the letter arrived. It came by courier from the northern border, sealed with black wax, marked urgent. Vaelor opened it in the war room, read the contents, went pale. He sent for Elyra immediately. She arrived within minutes, still dressed for administrative work, saw his expression, and knew. What happened? Carrick Thorne has assembled an army, 40,000 soldiers, alliance forces from 3 northern territories. They're marching south. Elyra's face went still. When? They'll reach our borders in 2 weeks, maybe less if they force march. This is retaliation. For the depot. For Frostvale. It's more than that. Vaelor handed her the letter. Read the last paragraph. She read. The words were clear. Carrick was demanding Elyra's head, personal surrender. In exchange, he'd spare Valdareth and withdraw his forces. If she refused, he'd burn the kingdom to ash. The ultimatum was simple. 1 life for thousands, the queen for the realm. Elyra set down the letter with steady hands. Her voice was calm, clinical, empty of fear. When do we mobilize? Vaelor stared at her. You're not seriously considering... Of course I am. She moved to the maps. We have what? 15,000 soldiers at full mobilization? 20,000 if we conscript civilians against 40,000? That's not a battle. That's a massacre. Then we use terrain, fortifications, guerrilla tactics. We've done more with less. Elyra? She turned to face him. Her eyes were ice. Don't. Don't you dare suggest I surrender. Don't you dare imply that one person's life is worth more than the kingdom's survival. You're not one person. I'm a strategic asset. That's all. And strategic assets don't get special treatment. Damn it, Elyra! Vaelor slammed his fist on the table. You're my wife. The word hung between them. Wife. The first time he'd said it like it mattered in almost a year. Elyra's expression cracked for just a second, then reformed into stone. Your wife, she said softly. Now you remember that. Now when it might cost you something real. She walked to the door. Mobilize the troops. Fortify the northern approaches. Send riders to our allies requesting support. And Elyra, I won't surrender. She didn't look back. Not to Carrick, not to save you from guilt, not for any reason. We fight. She left, and Vaelor understood with devastating clarity what he'd done. He'd spent months trying to rebuild trust through gestures and titles and public acknowledgement, but the real test had just arrived, because Elyra was about to walk into a war that might kill her. And this time, he couldn't save her by himself. This time, he had to trust her to save herself, while proving he valued her life more than the crown. The thing about consequences is they don't arrive when you're ready. They come when the universe decides you've had enough time to pretend you've changed. Then they test whether that change was real or performance. Vaelor looked at the maps, at the numbers that didn't add up, at the choice that wasn't really a choice, and understood finally what Elyra had known all along. Love without respect is possession. Respect without sacrifice is empty, and sacrifice without trust is just martyrdom wearing a crown. He had 2 weeks to figure out which one he was capable of, before the woman he loved walked into a war designed to kill her. And this time, all the titles and apologies in the world wouldn't matter. Only action would. Only proof. Only the willingness to burn his own kingdom to ash before letting her face Carrick alone. The War Council convened at midnight. Every general, every strategist, every lord with military experience. They crowded into the chamber like wolves forced to share a carcass, each one calculating angles and survivability. Vaelor stood at the head of the table, Elyra at his side. Co-regents facing impossible mathematics. General Thorne spoke first. His voice carried the flat certainty of a man who'd seen too many battles to believe in miracles. 40,000 soldiers, professional military, alliance trained. They'll reach the Ironwood Valley in 12 days. Maybe 10 if they push hard. He pointed to the map. We can fortify the valley approaches, narrow the engagement zone, force them into terrain that neutralizes their numbers advantage. For how long? Lord Garrett's face was grim. A week? 2? They'll just siege us and wait for starvation to do their work. Then we don't let them siege. We hit them before they entrench. With what army? Brennan's voice dripped acid. We have 20,000 at best. Half of them barely trained conscripts. You're suggesting we march inferior forces into open battle against a professional military? I'm suggesting we don't sit here waiting to die. The room erupted. Voices overlapping. Strategies proposed and torn apart. Fear disguised as tactical analysis. Vaelor let it continue for 30 seconds, then slammed his sword hilt against the table. The sound cracked like thunder. Silence fell. Enough. His voice cut through the noise like a blade through flesh. We're not debating whether to fight. We're deciding how to win. My king. Brennan stood. With respect, there's another option. Which is, give Carrick what he wants. Every eye turned to Elyra. She didn't move, didn't react, just stood there with the stillness of deep water. Brennan continued. One life against thousands. It's basic arithmetic. Strategic sacrifice for the greater good. Elyra's voice was ice. Strategic sacrifice. Is that what we're calling murder now? It's not murder if it's voluntary. She laughed, cold and sharp. You think I'd volunteer? You think I'd walk into Carrick's camp and offer my neck because some terrified lord decided my life was worth less than his comfort? I think you're a leader, and leaders make hard choices. You're right, they do. She leaned forward. Here's my hard choice. I'm not surrendering. Not to save you, not to save this kingdom. Not for any reason that lets a tyrant think threatening civilians produces compliance. She looked at each council member in turn. Because if we give Carrick what he wants now, what stops him from demanding more next year? What stops every warlord with an army from marching to our borders and demanding tribute? Surrender isn't strategy, it's precedent. And I won't set a precedent that makes this kingdom pray. Vaelor watched her watched the way she commanded the room without raising her voice, watched hardened generals defer to logic they didn't want to accept. She was right. She was also walking herself toward a death sentence, and he had to find a way to prevent that without undermining the authority she'd just established. The Queen has spoken. Vaelor's tone left no room for argument. We fight. General Thorne, I want 3 defensive strategies by dawn. Worst case, medium case, best case. Garrett, send riders to our allied territories. Call in every favor we have. We need reinforcements. He turned to Elyra. A word, privately. They left the council chamber, walked in silence through stone corridors lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on ancient walls, reached the battlements overlooking the city. Valdareth spread below them. Thousands of lights, thousands of lives depending on decisions made in rooms they'd never see. Vaelor spoke first. You can't fight this war from the front. Watch me. Damn it, Elyra. Carrick wants you specifically. If you're on the battlefield, he'll concentrate everything on killing you. You become the target that endangers everyone around you. Then I'll fight smarter. Use that focus against him. Or you'll die and prove him right, that threatening you produces results. She turned to face him. Her eyes reflected torchlight. What do you want me to do, Vaelor? Hide in the palace while soldiers die defending my life? Play the frightened queen waiting for men to save her? I want you to survive. The words came out raw, unguarded. Elyra studied his face, saw something there she hadn't seen in months. Real fear. Not strategic concern. Not political calculation. Just pure, undiluted terror at the thought of losing her. You can't protect me from this, she said quietly. You can't make me safe by keeping me out of the fight. That's not how this works. Then tell me how it works. Because I don't know how to watch you walk into a war designed to kill you. She was quiet for a long moment. You do what I've been doing for months. You trust that I'm competent enough to survive what I choose to face. You give me the respect of believing I understand the risks better than you do. She touched his hand briefly, then pulled away. I know you're scared. I know you want to lock me in the deepest room of the palace and handle this yourself. But that's possession talking, not partnership. What's the difference? Partners trust each other to be competent in their areas of strength. Possession tries to control outcomes through confinement. She looked at the city below. I'm going to this battle. I'm going to command from the field. And you're going to let me, because anything else says you haven't learned a damn thing. She walked away, left him standing alone on the battlements, understanding that she was right and hating it. Fear does strange things to people in power. It makes them reach for control when they should be building trust. It makes them tighten their grip when they should be opening their hands. It convinces them that protection requires restriction, but real protection comes from giving people the tools and authority they need to protect themselves. Vaelor was learning that lesson in the worst possible way. 10 days later, Carrick's army appeared on the horizon. 40,000 soldiers in disciplined formation, cavalry wings on the flanks, infantry center, siege engines rolling behind, war banners rippling in wind that smelled like snow and violence. They made camp 5 miles from Ironwood Valley, close enough to threaten, far enough to prepare. Vaelor's scouts reported back with numbers that made hardened warriors go pale. Professional soldiers, alliance-trained, well-supplied, rested from their march, ready for prolonged engagement. Against them stood 22,000 defenders, local garrison, conscripted farmers, allied forces from 3 minor territories who'd answered the call for reinforcements, brave, determined, outnumbered by nearly 2 to 1. The night before battle, Vaelor walked through the camp. Soldiers sat around fires, checking weapons, writing letters they hoped they'd never need to send. Some prayed, some drank, some just stared into flames with the hollow expression of people counting their last hours. He stopped at different fires, spoke to men whose names he'd never remember, listened to their fears, their hopes, their reasons for fighting. Most of them mentioned the Queen, said she'd saved their families during winter, had ensured grain shipments reached their villages, had negotiated trade agreements that kept their children fed. They weren't fighting for him. They were fighting for her. That knowledge settled in his chest like a stone. He found Elyra in this command tent. She wore battle armor, practical leather and steel, None of the ceremonial decoration that peacetime royalty preferred. Her hair was braided tight, her weapons laid out on the table, checking edges, testing balance. She looked up when he entered, didn't speak. He crossed to her, stood close enough to see the fine lines around her eyes, the weariness she hid from everyone else. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what specifically?" "The list is long. For all of it. For bringing Celine into our lives. For testing your loyalty when I should have been proving mine. For taking 10 months to understand what should have been obvious." He touched her hand. "For being so terrified of losing you that I almost pushed you away permanently." Elyra looked at their joined hands, didn't pull away. "Why now? Why tell me this tonight? Because tomorrow we might die. And I need you to know that the last year of my life has been spent understanding what an idiot I was, learning what partnership actually means, becoming someone worthy of standing beside you." She met his eyes. "Are you?" "I don't know, but I'm trying. And if we survive tomorrow, I'll keep trying for as long as you'll let me." Elyra pulled her hand back, picked up her sword, tested its weight. "If we survive tomorrow," she said quietly, "we'll talk about what comes next. But right now, I need you focused on the battle, not on us." "Understood." She moved past him toward the tent entrance, stopped, looked back. "For what it's worth, you have become someone different. Whether that's someone I can trust again, I don't know, but it's someone I don't hate." She left, and Vaelor stood alone in the command tent, holding on to that small mercy like a lifeline. Progress isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive with fanfare and transformation. It comes in small acknowledgments. In the space between contempt and consideration, in the willingness to reassess judgments made in pain, whether it was enough remained to be seen, but it was something. And on the eve of battle, something was better than nothing. Dawn broke over Ironwood Valley like a wound. Red sky, gray clouds, wind that carried the taste of coming violence. Vaelor's army assembled in defensive positions, archers on the ridges, infantry in the valley center. Cavalry held in reserve, every advantage they could squeeze from terrain and preparation. Across the valley, Carrick's forces formed battle lines, precise, disciplined, overwhelming. The warlord himself rode to the front on a black warhorse. His armor was silver and black, polished to mirror brightness. He carried a great sword across his back and wore confidence like a second skin. He raised one hand. A rider emerged from his ranks, carrying a white banner, calling for parley. Vaelor and Elyra rode out to meet him, 3 riders in no man's land, grass trampled flat by thousands of boots, sky pressing down like judgment. The messenger was young, scared, doing a job that might get him killed. Lord Carrick Thorne offers terms. Give him the queen. The army withdraws. Your kingdom survives. Vaelor's voice was flat. And if we refuse? Then he destroys everything, every soldier, every village, every stone of Valdareth's walls. He leaves nothing but ash and memory. Elyra spoke. Tell your lord he can take his terms and choke on them. Tell him if he wants me, he'll have to come through 20,000 soldiers to get me. The messenger paled. My lady, I'm not your lady. I'm your enemy. And I don't negotiate with men who threaten civilians to get what they want. She turned her horse. Tell Carrick, we'll see him on the field, where he can prove whether his army is as good as his threats. They rode back to their lines. Behind them, the messenger returned to Carrick, delivered the message. Carrick smiled, then gave the order to attack. War horns sounded across the valley. The ground shook as 40,000 soldiers began to move, infantry advancing in disciplined blocks, cavalry sweeping wide on the flanks, archers loosing volleys that darkened the sky. Vaelor's forces braced, shields locked, spears set, every man knowing that survival meant holding formation no matter what came at them. The armies collided like continents, steel on steel, screaming, dying, the brutal mathematics of violence playing out in blood and broken bodies. Vaelor fought in the center, his sword rising and falling, his guards around him cutting down anyone who got close. He moved through combat with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd trained for this his entire life. But this wasn't training. This was slaughter. Carrick's forces pushed forward, professional soldiers cutting through conscripts like wheat. The numerical advantage grinding down defenders through sheer pressure. On the eastern ridge, Elyra commanded the Archer Corps. She watched the battle unfold with cold calculation, saw where the lines were buckling, where reinforcement was needed, where tactical retreats would save lives without losing ground. She gave orders in rapid succession. Messengers sprinted to different positions, adjustments made in real time, the dance of command during chaos. Then she saw it. Carrick's cavalry breaking through on the southern flank, circling behind Vaelor's position, preparing to crush the king's guard from both sides. If they succeeded, Vaelor would be surrounded, cut off, dead within minutes. Elyra made a choice. She grabbed her sword, mounted her horse, called for her personal guard. 20 rangers, the same ones who'd ridden into Moonshade Forest, the ones who'd burned Carrick's depot. "Where are we going?" Garrett shouted over the noise. "To save the king." They rode down from the ridge, straight into the flanking cavalry, hit them like a blade through silk. Elyra fought with brutal efficiency, her sword cutting through armor and flesh, her horse trained for combat, trampling anyone who got too close. Around her, rangers moved as one unit, each protecting the others, each strike coordinated. 20 against 200, impossible odds. They didn't care. Carrick's cavalry commander saw her, recognized the crown, the armor, the woman his lord wanted dead. He rallied his forces, concentrated everything on killing her. Elyra became the target she'd warned Vaelor about. Every sword, every spear, every soldier within reach trying to take her down. She fought anyway. Because that's what leaders do. They don't calculate survival odds and retreat. They see what needs to be done and they do it, even when it might kill them. Especially when it might kill them. Garrett took a spear through the shoulder, kept fighting. Another ranger went down, trampled under hooves, then another. They were dying, buying time with their lives. And across the battlefield, Vaelor saw it happening, saw Elyra surrounded, saw her guard being cut down, saw the cavalry closing in. He made a choice, broke from his own position, rallied his personal guard, charged toward her location. Thorn grabbed his arm. "My king, you can't." "Watch me." He rode. Through enemy lines, through chaos, through everything standing between him and the woman who'd saved his kingdom twice and was about to die saving him a third time. His guard followed, cutting a path through Carrick's forces with desperate violence. They reached Elyra's position just as her horse went down. She rolled clear, came up fighting on foot, blood on her armor, exhaustion in her movements, still standing, still fighting. Vaelor dismounted, stood back to back with her. "You're supposed to be commanding from the ridge. Plans change." Clearly. They fought together, sword and sword. Movement synchronized from years of training beside each other, each covering the other's blind spots, each strike protecting the partner. This was what they'd been before pride poisoned it. Warriors who made each other better. Around them, their combined guards formed a circle, holding against overwhelming numbers, dying to protect two rulers who'd finally remembered what partnership meant. Then Carrick himself rode into the fight. He came through his own soldiers like a storm, his great sword sweeping in arcs that cut men in half, his armor turning aside strikes that would have killed anyone else. He was terrifying, and he was coming straight for Elyra. Vaelor stepped between them. "You want her? Go through me first." Carrick's laugh was thunder. With pleasure, they clashed, king and warlord, two alphas fighting for dominance, for territory, for the right to decide who lived and who died. Vaelor was good. Carrick was better. The warlord's blade crashed against Vaelor's guard with force that drove him to his knees. A second strike sent his sword spinning away. A third would have taken his head if Elyra hadn't thrown herself forward. Her blade caught Carrick's arm, drew blood, made him step back. She stood over Vaelor, weapon raised, eyes blazing. "You want a target?" "Here I am." Carrick studied her, bleeding, exhausted, defiant, impressive. Most rulers would have surrendered by now. Most rulers are cowards wearing crowns. I'm not. "No, you're a warrior playing queen. That's worse." He advanced. Elyra met him. They fought with brutal intensity, her speed against his power, her precision against his overwhelming force. She was magnificent. She was also losing. Carrick's blade crashed through her defense, sent her stumbling. A kick to the chest knocked her flat. He stood over her, sword raised. "This is where it ends. Your defiance, your kingdom, everything. Behind him, Vaelor grabbed a fallen spear, drove it through Carrick's back. The warlord froze, looked down at the spear point emerging from his chest, turned slowly to see Vaelor standing there. "Cheater," Carrick said, then collapsed. The battle didn't end immediately. Fighting continued, men dying because momentum carries violence beyond the death of leaders. But Carrick's commanders saw their lord fall, saw him killed by a king they'd been told was weak, saw the queen stand up bloodied but alive, and they made a calculation. This war was over. Carrick's army broke, not all at once, not dramatically, but unit by unit soldiers began to retreat, to disengage, to abandon a cause that died with their warlord. Within an hour, the valley was clear except for the dead and wounded. Valdareth had survived, barely, at terrible cost, but survived. Vaelor and Elyra stood in the center of the battlefield, covered in blood and mud and the stink of death. They looked at each other, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not love, not the romance that had started their marriage. Something harder, something earned through fire and survival. Recognition that they'd both changed, both grown, both become people worthy of standing beside each other. Whether that was enough to rebuild what had been broken remained uncertain, but it was a foundation, and foundations were where you started building. Elyra's legs gave out. Vaelor caught her before she hit the ground, held her while medics rushed forward, while the battlefield around them transformed into a triage zone, while soldiers who'd survived started the grim work of counting the dead. "I've got you," he said. She looked up at him, her face pale, her eyes still sharp. "I know," then closed her eyes and let herself be carried, for the first time in a year, trusting him to keep her safe, not because she needed protection, but because partnership meant letting someone else carry the weight when you couldn't anymore. The battle was over, but the war for their kingdom and their marriage was just beginning. The medics worked through the night, triage tents filled with wounded soldiers, their screams puncturing the darkness like accusations. Healers moved between bodies with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd seen too much death to still feel it individually. Every moan, every prayer whispered through broken teeth, every final breath released into cold air. The cost of survival laid out in rows. Elyra woke in one of those tents. Her armor had been removed. Bandages wrapped around her ribs where Carrick's boot had cracked bone. Her left shoulder throbbed where a blade had caught her guard. Everything hurt with the deep ache of a body pushed beyond its limits and forced to continue anyway. She sat up slowly. The tent spun. She breathed through it. A healer appeared at her side, an older woman with gray hair and hands scarred from decades of emergency medicine. "Easy, Your Grace. You took a beating out there. How many did we lose?" The healer's face went carefully neutral. "We're still counting. Give me a number." 3,000 confirmed dead. "Another 1,500 won't make it through the week." The healer's voice stayed clinical, detached. The only way to deliver information that heavy without breaking. "Your rangers lost 8, including Garrett." Elyra went still. Garrett, the man who'd ridden beside her through Moonshade Forest, who'd fought at her back through Carrick's cavalry, who'd taken a spear defending her position. Gone. The healer continued. "The king is in the command tent, uninjured except for bruising. He's been asking about you every hour. Tell him I'm awake. Your Grace, you need rest. Tell him." The healer left. Elyra sat in the dim tent light, breathing through pain and grief, and the hollow knowledge that victory always costs more than anyone wants to pay. 3,000 dead, 1,500 dying, families destroyed, children orphaned, villages that would never recover their losses, all because a warlord wanted revenge, and a king had made mistakes that created the opening for that revenge. She didn't blame Vaelor. Not anymore. Blame was too simple for what had happened. He'd made choices. Those choices had consequences. But the consequences rippled outward in ways no one could predict. That's how power works. Every decision creates waves. Most rulers never see where those waves crash, never count the bodies their pride produces. Elyra counted them, every single one, because that's what separated leaders from tyrants. Tyrants saw casualties as numbers. Leaders saw them as names, as families, as people who trusted them and paid for that trust with everything. Vaelor entered the tent 20 minutes later. He looked like he'd aged a decade. Blood still stained his armor. Exhaustion carved lines around his eyes. He moved like a man carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical injury. He saw her sitting up. Relief flooded his face. "You're awake. I'm alive. There's a difference." He crossed to her bedside, knelt so they were eye level. Didn't try to touch her. How bad? Broken ribs, separated shoulder, various cuts. "I'll heal." Garrett didn't. She looked away. "I know. He died protecting you. He died doing his job. Don't romanticize it." Her voice was flat, empty of the emotion churning beneath. Vaelor studied her face, saw the grief she was holding back, the weight of command when command costs lives. 8 Rangers dead, he said quietly. 37 from my personal guard. 42 cavalry. Hundreds of infantry. Thousands total. He sat back on his heels. We won. But it doesn't feel like winning. That's because it isn't. Elyra met his eyes. Winning would have been preventing this war entirely. Winning would have been making choices a year ago that didn't create enemies who wanted us destroyed. She touched her ribs, winced. This is survival. And survival always costs more than victory. Silence settled between them. Heavy with truth neither wanted to carry, but both had to. Finally, Vaelor spoke. I'm calling a memorial. Tomorrow at dawn. For everyone we lost. Every name read aloud. Every family acknowledged. Good. That's appropriate. And after that, I'm reforming the council. New laws, new oversight, new systems to make sure what I did, bringing Selene here, creating the vulnerability Carrick exploited, can't happen again. Also appropriate. He looked at her. I'm trying to fix this. You can't fix it. You can only learn from it. Elyra's voice was tired. The dead stay dead, Vaelor. The families stay broken. All we can do is make sure their sacrifice meant something, that we become better rulers because of what they paid. She leaned back against the thin pillow. That's the burden. Not the crown. Not the authority. The knowledge that people died trusting we knew what we were doing, and we have to earn that trust every day for the rest of our lives. Vaelor nodded slowly. Then, what happens now? Between us? I don't know. That's honest. It's all I have. She closed her eyes. You've changed. I see that. You've become someone who understands partnership instead of possession, someone who values competence over control. But change doesn't erase damage. It just means we're different people now than we were when the damage happened. She opened her eyes. I don't know if the person I've become can forgive the person you were. I don't know if what we had can be rebuilt or if we're just building something new from the ashes. Vaelor stood, looked down at her with an expression that held more grief than any battle wound. I'll take new over nothing. Maybe new is all that's possible. He walked to the tent entrance. Stopped. For what it's worth, I'm grateful you survived. Not because the kingdom needs you, because I do. He left before she could respond, and Elyra lay in the darkness, trying to figure out whether gratitude was enough foundation to build a marriage on, or whether some things, once broken, stayed broken no matter how carefully you tried to piece them back together. The memorial began at dawn. Every soldier, every citizen, every person who could walk gathered in the valley where the battle had been fought. The bodies had been removed, the blood washed away by overnight rain, but the ground still held memory. Violence leaves marks deeper than sight can measure. Vaelor and Elyra stood on a raised platform, co-regents addressing their people in shared grief. Behind them, 3,000 markers, simple wood stakes driven into earth, each one carved with a name. Vaelor spoke first. His voice carried across the valley without needing to shout. We gather to honor those who fell defending Valdareth, not as statistics, not as casualties, but as individuals who had names and families and futures that were stolen by war. He gestured to the markers. Each of these represents a person who trusted us to lead them well, to make decisions that protected them, to value their lives as much as we value our own power. His voice cracked slightly. We failed them. I failed them. My choices created the vulnerability that Carrick exploited. My pride opened the door to this war. And they paid the price. The crowd was silent. No one contradicted him, No one offered comfort, because he was right, and everyone there knew it. Elyra stepped forward. Her voice was quieter, but somehow carried further. My co-regent speaks truth. Leadership requires accountability. When our decisions cost lives, we don't hide behind justification. We acknowledge the price and carry it forward. She looked at the crowd, at faces marked by loss, at families missing fathers, brothers, sons. These dead were soldiers, farmers, merchants, teenagers who'd never seen battle before yesterday. They weren't warriors by choice. They were people who answered a call to defend their homes. Her hands clenched at her sides. We can't give them back their lives. We can't undo the war that killed them. But we can promise them this: their deaths will change how we rule, how we make decisions, how we value the lives entrusted to our care. She turned to Vaelor, and we can promise that the kingdom they died defending will be better than the one that asked them to fight. Together, they began reading names. It took 4 hours, 3,000 names, 3,000 lives, each one acknowledged, each one mourned. The crowd listened, wept, held each other. And when the last name was read, Vaelor made an announcement that would reshape Valdareth's future. Effective immediately, the Crown will establish a Council of Accountability, composed of citizens, veterans, families who've lost people to our decisions. They will review every major policy before implementation. He looked at Elyra. She nodded. No more unilateral authority. No more decisions made in isolation. Every choice that affects the kingdom will be examined by people who understand what those choices cost. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Additionally, Elyra continued, every family that lost someone in this war will receive compensation. Land grants, tax exemption, educational support for children. We can't replace the dead, but we can ensure their families don't also lose their futures. The crowd's murmur grew louder, surprised, cautiously hopeful. Because this wasn't normal. Rulers didn't usually admit fault, didn't create oversight for their own power, didn't redistribute resources to compensate for their mistakes. But Vaelor and Elyra weren't normal rulers anymore. They were people who'd learned that power without accountability was just tyranny wearing a crown. The memorial ended with a moment of silence. 3,000 dead. 3,000 futures erased. 3,000 reminders that leadership carried weight measured in lives. And 2 rulers finally understanding what that weight required. Not dominance, not control, not the illusion of infallibility, just honesty about the cost, and willingness to carry it forward. 3 months passed. Spring transformed Valdareth. Snow melted completely. Rivers ran full. Fields that had been frozen wastelands during siege season turned green with new planting. The kingdom rebuilt, physically and politically. The Council of Accountability convened weekly, reviewing trade agreements, military deployments, tax policies, providing civilian oversight that prevented the kind of unilateral decisions that had nearly destroyed them. It was messy, slow, frustrating for everyone involved. It was also necessary, because democracies aren't efficient. They're just less likely to produce catastrophic mistakes born from unchecked ego. Vaelor attended every session, listened to criticism, adjusted policies based on civilian input, learned to value process over speed. It grated against every instinct he'd been trained to follow. But he did it anyway, because transformation isn't comfortable. It's the slow grind of replacing instinct with intention, of choosing what you know is right over what feels natural. Elyra watched him, measured him, looked for cracks in the performance, for moments when the old patterns would resurface and prove this was temporary. She found none. Not because he was perfect. He still got frustrated, still wanted to bypass oversight and just implement solutions, still struggled with the loss of unilateral control. But he didn't act on those impulses. He sat with the discomfort, processed it, moved forward anyway. That consistency started to shift something in her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition that change, when sustained over months, started to look less like performance and more like genuine transformation. They governed together with increasing synchronization. Morning councils where they reviewed the day's agenda, evening debriefs where they analyzed outcomes, shared decision-making that distributed authority and risk. They were building something new. Not the romantic partnership of their early marriage. That was gone, burned away by betrayal and war. This was harder, more intentional, less about feeling and more about function. But function, when sustained long enough, created its own kind of intimacy. The intimacy of people who trusted each other in ways deeper than romance, who knew each other's weaknesses and worked around them, who made each other better through honest challenge rather than comfortable agreement. One evening, 6 months after the battle, Vaelor found Elyra in the palace gardens. She stood beneath a pergola covered in flowering vines, watching the sun set over the city. Her posture was relaxed in a way it hadn't been in over a year. He approached slowly, giving her space to acknowledge him or dismiss him. She turned, gestured to the bench beside her. He sat. They watched the sun set in silence for several minutes. Finally, Elyra spoke. "I've been thinking about us. And I don't know if we can go back to what we were. The people who fell in love and built a partnership on romance and mutual ambition." Vaelor nodded. "I know, but I think we might be able to build something different, something based on what we've learned, on who we've become." She looked at him. "You've proven you can change, that you value partnership over possession, that you're willing to share power even when it terrifies you. I have terrifying moments daily. I know." She almost smiled. "But you push through them. You choose the right action over the comfortable one. That's character." She touched his hand, briefly. "I don't love you the way I did 7 years ago. That love was built on illusion, on believing romance could survive the pressure of absolute power. What do you feel now? Respect. Trust that's been earned through evidence. Appreciation for someone who faced their worst instincts and chose to become better." She pulled her hand back. "I don't know if that's enough to rebuild a marriage, but it's enough to continue the partnership." Vaelor absorbed that. The distinction between partnership and marriage, between functional respect and romantic love. It wasn't what he'd hoped for, but it was honest. And honesty, he'd learned, was worth more than comforting lies. "Then we continue as partners, as co-regents, as two people committed to ruling better than we did before." He stood. "And if someday that partnership evolves into something more, we'll handle it. If it doesn't, we'll handle that too." Elyra looked up at him. "You've really changed. I had to." The alternative was losing everything that mattered. He walked a few steps, turned back. "For what it's worth, I do love you. Not the possessive obsession I mistook for love before, but the kind that wants you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me romantically. That's growth. It's survival." He smiled slightly. "You taught me that everything else is just ego wearing a crown." He left her in the garden, and Elyra sat beneath flowering vines, feeling something shift in her chest. Not love. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way they'd had before. But possibility. And possibility, when earned through suffering and transformation, carried more weight than any romance built on illusion. 2 years later, Valdareth thrived. Trade routes expanded. Agricultural production exceeded pre-war levels. The Council of Accountability had become standard practice, no longer radical, but simply how governance functioned. Other kingdoms watched, some with suspicion, some with interest. A few began implementing similar oversight structures. The model was spreading, proof that accountability didn't weaken leadership. It strengthened it by preventing catastrophic mistakes born from isolation and ego. Vaelor and Elyra governed from twin thrones in the Hall of Sovereigns. Equal seats, equal authority. Physical representation of power shared rather than hoarded. They'd become the rulers their kingdom needed. Not perfect, not without friction, but functional in ways that mattered. Their personal relationship remained complicated. They worked together seamlessly, finished each other's strategic thoughts, trusted each other's judgment implicitly in matters of state. They still maintained separate chambers, still kept emotional distance, still navigated the space between professional partnership and personal intimacy with careful boundaries. Some nights they had dinner together, talked about policy and philosophy and the endless challenges of keeping a kingdom functional. Other nights, they retreated to their separate wings, processing alone the weight that came with power. It worked, not perfectly, but sustainably. And sustainability, they'd both learned, mattered more than perfection. One autumn evening, Vaelor found Elyra in the Queen Mother's garden, the space she'd claimed during their worst period, where she'd retreated when his choices made the palace unbearable. She'd restored it over 2 years. planted new flowers, repaired the fountain, transformed it from a place of exile into a place of refuge. He stopped at the garden entrance, waited for invitation. She looked up from a book, gestured him in. He walked through flowers that hadn't existed during their crisis, sat on a bench she'd installed for evening reading. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous activity for kings." She almost smiled. "What about?" "About whether we're avoiding something we should be addressing, which is whether there's still possibility for us, beyond partnership, beyond functional respect." Elyra set down her book, studied him with those winter steel eyes that still saw through every defense he tried to build. What changed? Nothing. Everything. "I don't know." He looked at the garden, at what she'd built from ruin. "We've spent 2 years proving we can work together, trust each other, build something functional from the ashes of what we destroyed." He met her eyes. "But functional isn't what I want, not long term. I want what we had before I ruined it. The partnership that was also passion, the respect that was also love. You can't have that back. That relationship died when you brought Celine into our lives." "I know, but maybe we can build something new, something better, built on who we are now instead of who we were." Elyra was quiet for a long time. The sun set. Garden lights flickered on automatically. The fountain's water caught the light and threw dancing patterns across stone. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for." "Why?" "Because I'm different now. Harder. Less willing to risk the kind of hurt that comes from loving someone who might value power over me again. I wouldn't—" "You don't know that. Neither do I. People change under pressure, revert to old patterns when they're scared." She stood, walked to the fountain. "These 2 years have been good. We've built something functional, something that serves the kingdom well. I don't want to risk that by introducing romantic complexity." Vaelor absorbed the rejection. It hurt less than he'd expected. Maybe because he'd known it was coming. Maybe because she was right. "I understand. Do you?" "Yes. You're protecting what we've built, what the kingdom needs. That's wise." He stood. "But I need you to know that I'm not asking because I'm lonely or nostalgic. I'm asking because I believe we could be extraordinary together, not just as rulers, as partners in every sense." She turned to face him. "We are partners. You know what I mean. I do. And I'm saying no, not out of spite, not out of lingering hurt, but because the risk isn't worth the potential reward." Her voice softened slightly. "I respect you. I trust you. I value what we've built. But I don't love you, not romantically. Maybe I never will again. That has to be enough." It is. He meant it, because he'd learned something crucial over 2 years of transformation, that love without respect was possession, that partnership without romance could still be profound, that being enough for someone didn't require being everything to them. He walked to the garden exit, stopped. "Thank you for being honest, for not offering comfort I don't deserve. That's partnership." She picked up her book. Honesty even when it hurts. He left her in the garden she'd built from isolation, and Elyra sat beneath stars that had watched kingdoms rise and fall, feeling certain she'd made the right choice, but also feeling, for the first time in 2 years, a small flicker of regret. Not enough to change her answer, just enough to acknowledge that the man who'd destroyed them had become someone worthy of consideration. Whether that would ever be enough remained to be seen. 5 years after the war, Valdareth celebrated its founding anniversary. Festivals filled the streets, music and dancing and the kind of joy that came from prosperity and peace. Vaelor and Elyra watched from the palace balcony, side by side, 2 rulers who'd survived everything power could throw at them and emerged stronger. The kingdom loved them, not as romantic figures, not as a fairy tale couple, but as leaders who'd proven they valued their people's lives more than their own egos. That kind of love ran deeper than romance, more permanent, more earned. They'd built an empire worth inheriting, not through bloodline, but through systems, through accountability, through proving that power could serve rather than dominate. Below them, the city glowed with celebration. Elyra spoke first. "We did well. We survived. There's a difference." "Is there?" She glanced at him. "Surviving what we went through and using it to build something better." That seems like success to me. Vaelor nodded slowly. Then, do you ever regret it? Saying no 5 years ago? Sometimes. Small moments. Watching couples at festivals. Seeing what we might have had. She looked back at the city. But then I remember what we do have. Partnership that survived betrayal and war. Respect earned through crisis. Trust built from honesty rather than romance. That's rarer than love. More valuable. I know. They stood in comfortable silence. Below, fireworks began. Explosions of color against night sky. Beauty born from controlled violence. Like everything they'd built. Elyra touched his hand. Briefly. A gesture of acknowledgement rather than romance. We're good partners. The best. He didn't pull away. Didn't try to make it more than she offered. Just accepted the touch for what it was. Connection. Respect. The intimacy of people who'd survived together. Then the moment passed. She pulled back, returned to watching the festival, and Vaelor understood finally, completely, what he'd learned over 7 years of transformation. That some things, once broken, never return to their original form, but sometimes the rebuilt version, though scarred and different, carried more strength than the original ever possessed. They'd never be the romantic partnership of their early years. That was gone, burned away by betrayal and blood, and the brutal education that came from nearly destroying everything. But they were something better, harder, more permanent. They were sovereigns who'd learned that power without accountability was tyranny, that love without respect was possession, that partnership meant sharing burden rather than hoarding authority, and that sometimes the greatest act of love was respecting someone enough to accept their boundaries rather than pushing past them. The kingdom below celebrated leaders who'd saved them twice, who'd rebuilt from ash, who'd transformed crisis into opportunity. And on the balcony above, 2 rulers stood watching, not touching, not speaking, just being, together, in a partnership built from ruin, which was its own kind of triumph. Not the ending anyone expected, not the fairy tale of restored romance, but something truer, more honest, more reflective of what actually happens when power collides with humanity and both survive. They'd broken, endured, rebuilt, not into what they were, into what they needed to become. And as fireworks painted the sky with temporary beauty, Vaelor and Elyra stood as living proof that the strongest rulers aren't those who never fail. They're those who face failure, own it, and use it to become better than they were before. That's the real story. Not conquest, not dominance, not romantic triumph, just 2 people learning what it means to share power, to value partnership over pride, to build something that outlasts them both. The festivals would end, the celebrations would fade, the fireworks would become memory. But what they'd built, accountability, respect, sustainable power, that would remain. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, earned, strong enough to survive whatever came next. And in a world where kingdoms rose and fell on the egos of single rulers, that was revolutionary. Below them, Valdareth thrived. Above them, stars watched with the patient indifference of entities that had seen empires come and go. And between earth and sky, 2 rulers stood, scarred, changed, better. Proof that sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting what you wanted. It's becoming who you needed to be, and building something worthy of the people who trusted you to lead them well. That was their legacy. Not bloodline, not dynasty, just competence, accountability, and the hard-won wisdom that came from surviving their own worst instincts. The fireworks continued, the city celebrated, and 2 rulers watched over a kingdom they'd nearly destroyed and chosen instead to save. Not through dominance, through partnership. And that made all the difference.